Good afternoon and welcome all to my Housing Trust Fund Private Activity Bond webinar. Today's April 10th, 2026, and we're going to be discussing our application process, which the due date is coming up on May 1st. This webinar is recorded and I'll be putting the recording up on our website by the end of the week well, today is the end of the week, by Monday for sure. So the agenda for this webinar, I go over some stuff and that's the recorded part. And then I turn off the recording and ask if there's any general questions about the application. If you have specific questions, like you want to talk about your development in specifics, then we can probably do that offline. I don't know that people like to share that kind of stuff with everybody else. So we can do that separately. The agenda for the presentation, I'm going to talk about the El Paso County Housing Authority, an overview of the programs that we manage, the application process, because like I said, that's coming up on May 1st, and some tips and tricks, and then the Q&A part. So a little bit about the El Paso County Housing Authority. This housing authority is a non-traditional housing authority. We do not own or manage anything. Our county does not want to own or manage any kind of housing. So non-traditional, we're more like a financing authority. We help the developers who get the affordable housing done. It was established in 1993. The way that works is there was some single family bond proceeds back in the day that the county wanted to reinvest in the community. They didn't want to give it out as grants. They wanted to reinvest it so that it could keep going forever and ever. So the county can't make loans or anything like that. So they had to create the housing authority to do that for them. So it was established in 1993. There's a 5-member board to our housing authority, so you can see the industries that those members come from. We do have a vacancy currently, and you'll find the information for that on the website for El Paso County under volunteers. And I believe that is the housing development and finance seat that just became vacant. So if you know somebody in that housing development and finance area, then please invite them to apply. The Housing Authority has a semi-annual application process. So like I keep saying, our applications due on May 1st. We also have an opening on November 1st as well. And it is a competitive process. So the first thing that we do for the Housing Authority when it comes to housing is private activity bonds. So private activity bonds are actually issued by El Paso County, so it does require Board of County Commissioner approval for that. The applications are recommended by the Housing Authority, so it's all the same application process, which again is due May 1st. There's typically $15 million available every year through El Paso County because it's based on population. And the county is allowed to save their allocation of bonds up for 3 years before they get turned back over to the state. So currently we have about $48 million available in private activity bonds. The goal is always to establish or extend affordability when it comes to these developments. So if you're applying for private activity bonds, we want, no matter if it's new construction or rehab, we want to extend affordability or establish that affordability. So using a land use restriction agreement. Who's eligible to apply for private activity bonds? Private developers, nonprofits, and other agencies with experience in these kinds of funds. The application process, again, May 1st, November 1st. It's all one big application. And private activity bonds do require a pre-application meeting with staff, so that's me. Typically takes 15 to 30 minutes to go over the application process and to hear about your development. A little bit about the city and county alignment. The city of Colorado Springs receives private activity bonds as well. Since it's based on population, they get more like 34 million per year, where we only get 15 million. But again, the process, we've come together and kind of standardized our processes for private activity bonds. But you could be looking at applying to both of us this year, which is perfectly fine. And when you do look at applying to one or the other of us for private activity bonds, just take a look at our website. We have it spelled out specifically right under private activity bonds. Here's my housing programs page, and here's private activity bonds. And if you were to scroll down, we have specifics. So here's our fees, and then here's the thresholds, and I'll talk about that in a second. We spell all of that right out on our web page for you to find. So we do have new thresholds for our private activity bonds. Thanks to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act from 2025, they have decreased the minimum required aggregate basis to 25% starting in January of this year. To more closely align with that, we realize developers could have a hard time reaching that 25% right off the bat. So we have dropped our thresholds down to 45% for this year, and it'll be 30% for next year. So just depends on when you're applying, what threshold we would like you to meet. And we're just saying that those are how we're going to prioritize our applications. If you can't get down to that 45% threshold, that could be a discussion with our board. Moving on to the Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Trust Fund is administered by the El Paso County Housing Authority. You can see there it's to promote suitable living environments for all persons and families. This is a revolving loan fund. So like I said, this was established with single family bond proceeds back in the day. That is the only money that we get for this. We do not It's not part of that national fund. We don't get money from HUD. This loan fund is what it is, and it's currently sitting at about 6.7 million. We don't get any annual recurring infusions. We did get some ARPA funds back in 2022, but that's going to be it. The rest we have to keep going. So it's not given as a grant anymore. It had been back in the 90s when it was established. The goal is always, again, to establish and extend affordability. So whatever project you are applying for, whether it's, a development that's 5 units that needs to be rehabbed, or it's a 350 unit apartment complex, we want to establish or extend that land use restriction. And again, semi-annual application process, May 1st and November 1st. We'll take a look at the application in a minute. And when we're talking about the Housing Trust Fund, we say this is a very flexible fund. So funding terms, typically 200 to 500,000. You'll see on the slides as I'm sharing them, I have the specifics for some of the developments, and one of them, they took $410,970. So that's just what they needed for their development. Smaller developments are based on about 5 to 10,000 per unit. So if you're applying for, 120 units, we would expect a $500,000 request. If you're applying for a 10 unit development, maybe 100,000 would be more appropriate. Interest rates for these loans anywhere from 2 to 3%, and amortized repayment is preferred. So again, this has to be a revolving loan fund. We have to receive money back in order to keep doing these loans. This is kind of innovative for our state. It's like one of the only housing trust funds that you will find in the state, and we have to keep it going. So we need to get those recurring payments from the loans that we make. And we would like these loans to be hard pay, which means not like based off of what money you have left over at the end of the month. So hard pay above the line loans. Flexible project types. So we focus on creating and maintaining affordable multifamily rental units, but there are other options out there, and our board is open to hearing about them. So they can also do initial homeownership ideas. It's just hard with the price of housing around here. We could put 50,000 into a 5-unit multifamily complex, a little infill project, or 50,000 into one homeownership project to help one family. They would prefer to help the 5 families or 10 families on the larger project. It's just really hard with home ownership these days. They can also do homelessness projects, special needs housing, housing rehab. Typically, we use CDBG funding here in our office to do those kinds of projects, though. It is an option for the Housing Authority, and they would welcome applications, but typically those things we use CDBG for. Flexible usage as well. So we call this gap financing. Since it's not federal funds, then um, you can use it for pretty much anything that you that you need it for in your finance stack. Typically, you have sources like LIHTC and PAB that cover the majority of a project, and those things come with all the rules. We like to say this does not have all the rules, but we are starting to require more compliance reporting. Again, we realize that our funding, this HTF funding, is small potatoes compared to the other kinds of funding that you will have. So we're open to compliance reporting on however we see it. Like if you're already doing a LIHTC report, you could just send that report and we'll consider it compliance reporting as well. And then the last program that I wanted to talk about was special limited partnerships. So the last webinar that I did in October, I heard on a survey, which I'm going to send a survey to all of you as well, but I heard that I didn't go over this well enough. I kind of glossed over it. So I'm going to do a little bit more deeper dive into special limited partnerships this time. This was new for 2025. And there's a Colorado revised statute that says if you have a housing authority that is an owner in a development for affordable housing, then you can get property taxes and sales and use tax during construction that you don't have to pay, which can be really important for a lot of developments that are out there. We've currently only done this once, and you can see that was Freedom Springs. But we do have it as an option for future developments. There is a policy document that's available. Some key provisions, again, we want to establish or extend that affordability clause. We're only doing projects located in El Paso County. So that state law says that any housing authority can go anywhere in the state and do this. We're keeping it to El Paso County. You will find Colorado Springs Housing Authority has some partnerships that are outside of city limits, like they're partners with the Air Force Academy, and they've got a couple up in the Divide or Woodland Park area. We're keeping it to El Paso County. And if you are applying to us, you must have municipality support. So let's say you're doing a development in Green Mountain Falls. That's fabulous. We love Green Mountain Falls. We want support from Green Mountain Falls as well, because they have to acknowledge that with us being a partner in that development, they're going to lose property taxes. So we want them to know how that works, and we want to know they're on board. And then if that municipality has a housing authority, we need their letter of support as well. So I know you probably didn't know this, but Calhan has a housing authority. It's teeny tiny for one little apartment complex out there for seniors, but if you're building in the Calhan area and you're asking us for a special limited partnership, we do need Calhan Housing Authority support for that. The same is true for the City of Colorado Springs. If you're doing any development in the City of Colorado Springs, we expect you to go to Colorado Springs Housing Authority for a special limited partnership before you would ever come to the county. We do have reasonable upfront and annual fees for our SLPs. And again, that's written on the policy document. If you're interested in applying for that, I can send you the document. And again, it's all the same application process. The deadline's May 1st. Some application information. Again, all 3 of those programs that I discussed are on one application. They're accepted May 1st to November 1st. Our Housing Authority Board likes to focus on these main areas. So development location. We would obviously love to see developments outside the City of Colorado Springs. We have one commitment letter for the new development going up in Manitou Springs. That is fabulous. It's pretty rare to get developments outside the city of Colorado Springs, but we would love to see them. Your project timeline. So for this application process, the application's due May 1st. We would like to see you have a financial closing by June of next year, 2027. They do not like to try to tie up funding for more than a year. So if you were to apply May 1st and be given a commitment letter in June, we would expect closing by June of 2027. So of course, if your project has zoning issues or you haven't completed your financial stack, that could delay your closing, and we're going to want to know about that in the application process. We want to know income targeting and unit count and mix, and some kind of repayment plan for the Housing Authority Housing Trust Fund loans has to be stated right on the application. I'll show you where that shows up. And if you have any benefits beyond the housing, are there any services that you're providing there? Any partnerships or collaborations? We like to see that stuff as well. Our application timeline, again, applications are due by May 1st, 5 p.m. And I will provide the materials to our Housing Authority Board by the 7th, so they have a week to review them. May 13th is their meeting where they will go over those applications the first time, and they'll decide if they want to see any presentations by the developers. So I'll let you know by May 15th if you're chosen to do a presentation. I need your materials by June 3rd if you're offered to do a presentation, so that again I can share those with the board ahead of time. They get a chance to review everything. June 10th is that next Housing Authority meeting where presentations are heard and reviewed, and usually the Housing Authority Board makes a decision right there at that meeting. So approval letters, commitment letters, that kind of thing are sent out right after that, and I would say give us at least a week just to make sure we get everything taken care of. So you'll know by June 17th. And then before closing, our closing documents are prepared by our legal reps at QTAC Rock and signed by either the Housing Authority for a Housing Trust Fund loan or SLP, or the Board of County Commissioners when it comes to private activity bonds. And then at closing, if you're doing a Housing Trust Fund loan, I deliver a cashier's check directly to the closing. We like to go to the title company. We do not like to do wire transfers. So if you do receive a private activity bond recommendation, an email is sent to the developments that are recommended, and it outlines the next steps. We like to do Board of County Commissioner inducement resolutions within 2 months of that recommendation. So we would expect to do that, by August at the very latest this year, just to get that inducement nailed down. We do one TEFRA hearing. We're required to do that, the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act hearing. We do that 2 months before closing, and it's held here in our office. And then our third public hearing is going to be the Board of County Commissioner meeting. That's meeting number 2, about 2 weeks before closing. That's where we do our public approval certificate and final bond resolution. So those are the 3 public hearings that we have, the 2 Board of County Commissioner meetings and the TEFRA hearing. If you receive a Housing Trust Fund conditional commitment letter, this one details the development. So whatever you applied for, your unit count and mix, your AMI levels, the loan terms that we're offering, the interest rate, amortization, all of that, and the conditions of participation. So you can see a list there over on the right. Of course, we want you to get your financial stack together before closing. You have to pay your expenses, so you get to pay our attorneys, so that's included on there. Execution of loan documents, you have to get everything signed, so all of that's pretty standard. When we send you that conditional commitment letter, of course it requires acceptance, and you can just send an email back to me saying that those terms and conditions we offered are fine, or you can negotiate. That conditional commitment typically expires within 12 months. Again, we do not like to tie up our funding for years on end, so we will offer it to you for that 1 year. It will expire in usually June 1st of 2027. And if there's any changes to the commitments in that letter, has to go back to the Housing Authority Board. So some things that have come up are like we needed to pencil out our funding a little bit better, and we need to cut down our two-bedroom units and add more three-bedroom units. Or let's say in our first housing trust fund commitment, we wanted to be in second place, but you go and get other funding that wants to be in second place. If you ask us to move to third place on the lien position, has to go back to the board for that. That's not a staff decision. So, are you ready to apply? If you've got plans to obtain site control, you could be ready to apply. And if there are no zoning issues, because we know that zoning can take a long time to clear up. If you've got your environmental studies, your market studies, preliminary development plans, the pro forma, that's actually part of the application. You have to have that. And if applicable, if you've applied for other funding and you've got some commitment letters or letters of intent, we would love to see those as well. So let's take a look at the application really quick. First thing I want to point out, this is tab 1, the instructions, and it says right here at the bottom of the first paragraph in yellow, this application was most recently revised on April 1st. This is our latest and greatest. And the only thing that I changed from the October application is that private activity bond threshold stuff. So you can see here we dropped it down to 45% for this year and 30% for next year. When you start filling out the application, I went ahead and filled in some stuff just so I can show you. When you fill out these boxes here, remember I said all three parts are on one application. You can say if you're applying for a housing trust fund, yes or no. Private activity bonds, if you hit yes, then that fills in and you can add more information. And the same with an SLP, special limited partnership, yes or no. So you fill in the information here, say what lien position you're asking for, the interest rate, the amount, all of that's pretty general. When you're filling out these boxes down here, when it says provide a brief summary, just remember the kind of things we're looking for. This is a 50-unit multifamily building, 10-acre size, zone single family, but we're working on changing it. That's something they would like to know. Where's it located? What's your unit mix? And AMIs. Here I'm saying in this example one that we're doing some VASH vouchers. That's awesome to know. And there's some amenities. So we're talking here about some transportation, food pantry. Here's the unit mix again. On-site leasing, property management office, just all sorts of good stuff in there. And then we're going to have some ADA accessible units, just general information about the development. Provide an overview of your agency. So we want to know who's applying to us and information from the market study saying that you know what's going on in that area and you're attempting to meet those needs. If there's anything else that's integral, list any organizations you're partnering with. If the project is not awarded funds or if you're not awarded what you're asking for, how's that going to affect the development? And then the last question on the first tab, can a financial closing be completed within 1 year? And it's a simple yes or no. And then we give you a nice little checklist of things to include with your application if you have them. They really do want to see market studies and preliminary development plans. Remember, if we're talking housing trust fund applications, we're small potatoes, and we realize that. So we're assuming that your LIHTC application requires much more detailed information than we do. And if you're already applying to LIHTC and you're providing them all this information, just send it to us as well. The next tab is your development budget, and as you're filling this in, you're filling in the yellow stuff. And the gray stuff will stay grayed out until you've complete the rest of the application. But if you'll notice, this looks like a lot of the other applications that you'll be seeing as developers. This is based off the LIHTC application, so should be really easy to fill in. Income and expenses tab. Again, you're filling out the yellow sections. We want to know what kinds of units you have and the income levels and how many of them there are. And once you fill in that information, then this stuff here on the development budget fills out automatically. And then we have expenses over here on the right. Again, very general information for a lot of developers. Here we have the financing sources, so you can say TBD, to be determined who your lender is going to be, who you're applying to. But once you fill in this information, the payment stuff fills out for you. Again, you can't fill in the gray stuff. This information pulls over from the very first page, where you made the request, and then you can add in other stuff. We know there's other stuff going on out there, like the TOC, the Transit Oriented Communities Grant. Maybe you're getting that, you want to add that in. That would be awesome. And then once you fill in all of these things over here, that helps figure out this sources and uses tab. These all fill in for you as well. So that's under financing. The pro forma just says how you're going to make your payments back to everybody for the next 15 years. And most of this is just general stuff like rent income. We typically see increases of 2%. So those, you can change them if you need to, but that's just the general number that's always there. And if you have to add in other payments that need to be made, again, you can do that right here. Here's where we have the Housing Trust Fund loan repayment. If you're requesting an HTF loan, that's typically above the line, so not dependent on cash flow. So that's already written in there for you. And then the other thing is how fast are you going to pay back any deferred developer fees? So you can set that schedule over here on the right, how fast you're going to pay it back. So this says we're going to use 5% of our available funds to pay back that deferred developer fee. And if you change that to 10%, then of course that amount goes up every year and you pay it back faster. So however you want to schedule to do that. And like I said, this sources and uses fills out for you based on what you put under financing. And you get to say, here's this main loan and we're planning to apply, or it's committed or pending, however it works out for you. Of course, if you're applying for the Housing Authority Housing Trust Fund loan, that would be pending because you're just now submitting the application. And then down here, I do not know why all of these things have lines through them. I'll fix that for the next application. But this is just to say where your funds are going. So the site improvements, you said that was going to be $379,000 in this example. And what are you planning to use to pay that? And we just said Housing Authority, the HTF loan, because that's where it fit in on your stack. SLP requests, that is this tab here, and pretty general information. Have you reviewed the policy first? What is your proposed upfront fee and how did you calculate that? That is in our policy. So this is 0.02% of the total development cost is how we got that number. And then what's your proposed annual fee? And in our example, we're doing 50 units. So we said $100 per unit, and we're going to pay an annual fee of $5,000. Our housing choice vouchers accepted. Is this development occurring in a municipality? So that's a drop down. Is it occurring in any of these or none? It's unincorporated. And do you have a letter of support from that municipality? Of course, that's what we want to see. Is this development occurring in a municipality that has a housing authority? So again, we have Calhoun, Colorado Springs, and Fountain all have housing authorities. So if you're building in any of those areas, we would need a letter of support from them as well. And then we have another checklist here of things to provide to us if you are doing an SLP application. And then at the very end, I have notes, and my only note from my little application here is about those grayed out lines for some reason. So I know to go back and fix that for next time. So that is our application. Here we go. And if you're submitting an application, again, May 1st, 5 o'clock, give as much information as possible. So any documentation or studies, especially if you're applying to something bigger and you already have to provide that stuff, send it to us as well. PowerPoints are not required at this initial stage. They will be required if you're invited to do a presentation, but they're not required for the application, but they are very helpful. They are included in the entire packet that the board reviews. Have the financial stack sorted out as best you can. They're going to be asking questions off of that thing. And then contact me for a box.com link if you need to upload larger documents. Those environmental studies and appraisals and all that, those take up a lot of space. You usually can't email them. So if you need a box.com link, I can send it to you. Some other people send it to me just through Google. So Google Docs for that. So however you need to, that is perfectly fine. And there's my contact information. So we do require that initial meeting if you're doing a private activity bond application, not so much for Housing Trust Fund. SLP, I would say do a meeting for that too. But there's my contact information. No question is a bad question, and I love talking development stuff.